So I'll be kind of comparing this evening. It's going to be more informal than a panel discussion, just because we don't want to put people kind of on a platform for you to all try and roast. The purpose of this is not a roasting, and neither is it a debate. So it's more of a Q&A for students to get the answers to their questions that we've been hearing as a student union over the past few weeks. So please be considerate when you get questions and answers. Coming up to the front is quite daunting, but otherwise I'm going to introduce our members that are here this evening. So we've got Professor Colin Riordan, our Vice Chancellor at the front. We've got the three PVCs, Professor Rudolph Alleman from the PSE College, Professor Gary Baxter, from the BLS College, and David Walker-Davis from the Arts, Humanities and Civic Sciences Department of this college as well. We've also got Dr. Paul Brennan and Rowan as well, from the Vice Presidents of the UCD, with Ryan Howard as well. So if you have a question to ask, please put your hand up. I've got some stock ones that have been asked in advance from students that can't make it today, so I will be dipping into those as well. So kind of rules of that I'll go into later, but we've got some short presentations from each of these members just as a start us off. So I'm going to do it so up to 5 minutes per presentation. Kind of got a lot of questions to go through, so to try and keep the pace up. And I'll be timing, so please don't be put off if I say please wrap up after 5 minutes, but just to keep us on schedule. But I'm going to introduce our Vice Chancellor to start.
Thanks very much, Nick, and thanks very much to all of you for making the time to come along to this. It's an important matter I know that you are very interested in, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. So I'll try and keep this, as Nick said, pretty short so that we've got time for questions afterwards. This is the second student town hall I've held this year. There was one at the beginning of January. It turned out it was so near the beginning of January that there weren't really enough students there, so we agreed actually the thing to do is to have another one, which is what this is now. The same week we did hold a town hall with staff, which was very well attended, so that was good. First thing I'd like to say is that I personally and the university fully respect the right of staff to take industrial action. You know, it's a really important part of our democracy, as is free speech and the other values that we uphold. And having said that, you know, this is a really difficult situation. It's not one that anybody wants to be the case. If there was an easy, straightforward solution, I'm sure we would have already found it. So I know that our staff are committed to their students and want the best for them. Clearly, our priority as a university and as a management team is to provide education for our students, and we're going to do everything possible to minimise disruption to teaching and learning. I want to thank all the colleagues across the university who have been and are and will be working very hard to achieve that. We're trying to communicate well with students as well as we can, and to engage with students who are affected by this. Clearly, communication is never easy, and there's bound to be occasions when it doesn't work as well as we would like it to. And of course, we're not going to be able to solve all problems that arise, unfortunately. And because of that, we've developed a new particular bespoke student complaint procedure to deal with complaints relating to industrial action, and we'll be able to give you more detail about that as we go on during the course of this session. Now, you know, this is I've only got a couple more things to say. This is a complicated dispute. It's by far the most complicated I've ever encountered. It's to do with pensions on the one hand, and that is dealt with by in a kind of tripartite way between University UK, the UCU, the Union, and USS, University Superannuation Scheme, which is the pension scheme. So talks are continuing between those parties on that. And then you've got a separate set of issues which are pay, workload, casualisation and inequality, and those are being dealt with by the universities, colleges and Colleges Employees Association in negotiation with the UCU. So there are two separate strands of talks, one of them about several issues and one of them about pensions. So, you know, we'll need to kind of, if there are specific questions on that, we'll need to kind of break that down. So, you know, we obviously do want a solution that recognises the aspirations and efforts of our staff, who are hardworking and dedicated. We're in a constrained environment, we all are as universities, financially, but the good news is that negotiations are continuing. There were talks yesterday between UCA and UCU, and there are continuing talks and have been throughout January and February, and they will continue on the pensions issue. So that's good, and I very much hope that a resolution will be able to be found before this dispute continues much further. So I will leave it there for the moment to make sure we have enough time. Thank you.
Okay, 5 minutes again.
Hi there, my name is Rowan and I'm a student here at Cardiff. Well, actually I've been a student here on and off since 2010 when I first came to do a degree in linguistics. In the last couple of years I've also got involved with the trade union work with UCU, and I've just become one of the vice presidents along with Paul of our University College Union branch here in Cardiff. And because this is an information and advice session, I wanted to give a quick bit of info about what unions and strikes actually are for. Apologies to those of you who are well aware, but to be honest, I don't think that I knew properly what the point was when I first came to Cardiff, so I thought it might be a good idea. Trade unions are groups of workers who come together to represent workers' interests in the workplace. Among other things, union members work together to improve pay and conditions. It's largely because of trade unions that we have certain workers' rights, like weekends and an 8-hour day. Those kind of things are things that workers fought hard for. We tend to only hear about unions when big strikes are happening, but actually union members like myself, Ryan and Paul are working every day, often behind the scenes, to help improve things for workers. This can be individually in the form of casework, or collectively by taking part in joint negotiating forums and consultations. So then, what is strike action when we do have to take it? That's when workers withdraw their labour en masse. It happens when there's a dispute between trade union members and employers. It usually happens when problems cannot be solved through negotiations. Workers sacrifice their pay as a result of withdrawing their labour, which prompts the question, I think, of what the university or universities in general plan to do with the amount of money that they've saved from the last 8 days of strike in November and December, and will save from the next 14 days. UCU members see this strike as a last resort because negotiations have broken down and employers aren't compromising on certain issues like pay, which has not risen in line with inflation and has fallen by around 20% in real terms since 2009. As Martin Howard on Twitter pointed out, and always cite your sources, this reflects an inability to budget in line with inflation. The strike is not designed to impact students. I think it's really important to put that across. I know that students are being affected, but research staff are also striking, and their withdrawal of labour is not going to be visible to you as students. But regardless of whether striking staff do teach or interact with students in other ways, their working conditions are our learning conditions, the conditions that we are trying to receive an education in. And I personally don't want to be taught or supervised by people who are overworked, underpaid, and do not have job security. If the university valued its students, I think it would do more for its staff too. UCU is willing to work with employers to reach solutions that do work for everyone, including the sustainability of the sector as a whole. And that's my brief introduction to UCU and strikes.
So is there a particular order for the PECs of the college? We'll start with the Dean. Yeah, 5 minutes.
Hello everybody, I'm going to say something about the nature of the strike in AHSS in particular and how we're dealing with it within that context. It's going to be a bit more technical and a bit drier than the first 5 minutes, but this is how we're doing what I've just said across our 10 schools. In the large college of which I'm head, the impact of the strike is going to be different across those 10 schools, but we do know because of the nature of the staff and recent history that certain schools will be significantly affected. That was the case in 2018. Some of you would have been affected by that, and in October and November last year. I'll say something in a minute about what we, by definition, don't know and can't know about strikes. In advance of the strike action, though, last autumn, we ensured that all schools followed the same protocol, okay, the same preparation, the same comprehensive process for two things. One is very clear communications with students, which we wanted to be absolutely crystal clear, and B, on how we are seeking to mitigate, which is an expensive term for alleviating or reducing the effects of strike action. I've issued all schools with what I'm calling a detailed toolkit to follow to ensure that any impact on you as students is minimized and that you have the ability, and this is the important bit, to study appropriately and to complete your assessments in ways that satisfy the quality standards of the degree that you will get. What we call, technically, demonstrating a module's or a program's learning outcomes. I'll come back to that. A little bit of philosophy. It's in the nature of a strike to disrupt. Would you agree? Yes. Those who are not in favour of the strike would agree with that. Those who are striking would surely agree with that. It's in the nature of a strike to be disruptive. Now, a strike of this kind means that schools will not necessarily know in advance who's striking. That's the nature of the contract that we have, the understanding that we have with our colleagues who are striking, and so our knowledge will be really imperfect of what needs to be mitigated before the end of strike action. It's only at the end of the strike action that we will know what we need to deal with. Clearly, a lot of teaching will continue, and clearly some colleagues who decided to strike last time may not strike, will not strike this time, or not strike for the whole period. Clearly, at the same time, many colleagues who did strike last time will again strike this time, either for part of the 14 days or for the full 14 days. Now, some colleagues will want to communicate with students themselves and offer guidance and advice regarding your studies and alternative ways of delivering and assessing content. I think that is going on. I am grateful to colleagues for doing that. The strike means that they're not obliged to do that, but that is certainly going on. At the same time, other colleagues will choose technically not to do that. Final couple of things. What I want to emphasize is that schools have been busy, and they've been busy for a while with this toolkit and with various meetings that I've been sharing in AHSS to identify teaching and assessments that may be impacted. And when we know that they have been impacted, things will start kicking in. What are those things? Alternative means of covering content and alternative learning opportunities for you will be offered, and changes will be made to assessments where modules have been affected to ensure that you're not disadvantaged and that you're not asked to answer, for example, examination or essay questions on topics that have not been formally delivered owing to the strike. So where we find that we do have module-affected learning, a process will kick in to ensure that A, you're able to complete the assessments, and B, that you're able to do so in ways that, again, satisfy the quality thresholds of your degree. So we're not compromising in that regard. And we've got clear processes in place to manage any variations in assessment. And to ensure that any exam boards, right, will take the impact of the strike technically into consideration. So where we know modules have been affected, the exam boards will know that. We've also asked schools to ensure that they look at where it's possible to reschedule additional sessions. That may not be possible, but we've asked them to do that. That's the end of mine. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. It's difficult for me to follow the eloquent discourse you just had from Damien, because as far as the College of Biomedical and Life Sciences is concerned, the process is and mitigations that Damien has described apply as well in biomedical and life sciences. So the situation is largely unchanged from the update that I gave about 5 weeks ago. The impact of industrial action within the College of Biomedical and Life Sciences is expected to be, again, heterogeneous. Some schools will be more affected than others, and the 2 schools that we anticipate being most affected because of the history of 2018 and last year are psychology and biosciences. Nevertheless, in all 7 schools, the priority of the head of school and all of the staff who are not engaged in industrial action has been to communicate extensively with students. So, as you've heard, where variations in teaching or assessment are required in order to allow students to have the opportunity to meet learning outcomes, these variations will be communicated. At present, the schools have mapped or are in the process of mapping and will continue to map the impact of the industrial action. And when additional opportunities, resources that will give equivalent learning opportunity are required, these will be provided. Examinations and assessments are scheduled to go ahead as planned during the scheduled periods, assessing the learning delivered. So variations to assessments, examinations will take into account where learning or equivalent learning opportunities have not been available. So all these variations to exams and assessments will be communicated to students. And certainly, and this is probably the final and the most important point, all the examination boards will ensure that the impact of industrial action is taken into account. Thank you.
Hello everybody, good afternoon. So it's the last one, it's physical sciences and engineering, and what I would like to say is, as Gary just said, much of what Damien said and explained is also applicable to what we do in physical sciences and engineering. However, the nature of the disciplines is slightly different in the sense that much of our assessment, of course, is not so much qualitative as quantitative, and therefore it is much easier to mitigate these actions, the effects of the strikes. I should also say that the effects that we had in the past, the strikes that we had, the recent strikes we had, I think they had an effect. Our union colleagues will be pleased to hear that on the thinking of our staff. The numbers of people on strike was not very large in physical sciences and engineering, so it didn't impact so much on the teaching activities. We have had, again, like BLS, we had a heterogeneous response, but the numbers overall of those on strike were not very high in my college, and that obviously made the delivery of learning and teaching much easier for us. As I said, and that's important to me actually, it did help a discussion which is very important that we had between the College of the University. From that viewpoint, it is good that that discussion, I hope, will continue. That is a good thing. In terms of mitigation, everything you've heard is applicable with us too, and I want to repeat it again. We had not very many modules affected. There was mostly in the School of Earth and Ocean Sciences there were the effects, and a little bit in physics. There were quite a few colleagues who did not took part in the strikes in physics, but the effect on teaching was absolutely minimal. So, I don't actually exactly know why, but it wasn't. There was only one module that was affected. In Earth and Ocean Science, the effect is a little bit bigger because it affected field trips. You will know that when you study, when you do Earth and Ocean Science, you spend all the time on field trips, and obviously preparation for that was affected a little bit, but that could be easily mitigated during the field trip, so it didn't matter that much. So again, what we are really keen, and it's a very good point Damien made, is while we cannot replace the teaching that was missed, we can make sure that the quality of the education is not affected. The quantity obviously is slightly affected, but in the end, what you really care is that you get a high level degree based on extremely good teaching material, so you're actually prepared for what you came here to do. And that we will make sure will happen. No material that was missed will be assessed. That is absolutely clear. And I think that's really important to me, that we get the quality that we deserve. All my staff, and that includes absolutely those who do take strike action, are very, very keen. That's what they're here for, to make sure you get the best possible education. Thanks very much.
And then last is Rodney. Rodney, which year were you student university?
Many years ago. I'm Rodney Evans, Head of Registry. Just to give you a brief outline of a bespoke complaints procedure that we've introduced, so that if you are dissatisfied after the actions that have been taken by heads of schools as outlined by the Pro-Vice Chancellor, you have a recourse and a means of raising those with the university. So the reason we've introduced bespoke complaints procedure is to try and simplify the information that you need to provide when you submit a complaint, and also to try and expedite the complaints that you submit. So one of the actions that we've taken in the new procedure is that we've removed the informal stage of the procedure, and we've done so because the heads of school have been taking actions and are taking actions to try and deal with the disruption to your learning which may be caused by the industrial action. The complaints procedure is different from the academic appeals procedure. The complaints procedure is something that you use if you are dissatisfied about your experience as a student, whereas the academic appeals procedure is something that you can use at the end of the academic year if you wish to challenge a decision of an examining board. Therefore, if you are dissatisfied during this period of industrial action, either by the actions which have been taken by the schools, or if you feel insufficient actions have been taken, then you should submit a complaint at the time that you are dissatisfied, and don't delay it unduly. Clearly, heads of schools will need to take time to engage with staff who haven't undertaken industrial action to identify supporting actions. Therefore, you do need to give some time for the heads of school to communicate with you, and the time to submit a complaint would be after the receipt of such communication. The procedure is published on the student intranet pages, so you all have access to it. We've also provided some question and answers on there to try and answer the typical questions that you may have before you submit a complaint. And also you can receive advice from the Advice Centre in the Students' Union, who helped us develop the complaints procedure before it was finally approved by the Vice-Chancellor. When you submit a complaint, it's important to identify why you are dissatisfied and provide some evidence. And typical evidence would be that the lectures which have been cancelled, what do they represent as the total number of lectures that you would receive during the course of an academic year, and to identify why you believe the supporting actions to provide you with an equivalent learning experience have not been sufficient. We've asked you to submit complaints by the 10th of March relating to the industrial action which took place during November and December. But also we will accept complaints throughout the duration of the academic year and up to the 10th of July if you remain dissatisfied with the actions which take place after the period of strike action which will take place in February and March. The complaints procedure enables you to ask for a remedy, so to set out what you think we should do as a university to support your learning. And our priority is, as set out by the Pro-Vice Chancellors, is to take action to mitigate some of the disruption caused and to try and support your learning through the rest of the academic year.
questions for the last 25 minutes or so. So I guess some ground rules to go through. Probably going to take them in sets of 2, so we'll take them 2 at a time. I'll open up to the floor in a moment. We've also got some submitted beforehand, which I'll dip into in between. I guess if there's a specific question that's targeting either side, then I'll direct it to that person or that body. Otherwise, if there's a question that's weighted that might need both responses, I'm going to limit that to a minute each, so less of a rebuttal, but more of a answer it on yourself kind of thing. If there is a question that you would like to ask either side, please stay. So beforehand, so if you want to ask the university something, we want to ask UCU something to give us more of a gauge. I guess when that question's been asked, if either side would like to also reply, and I haven't said yes beforehand, you could just wave, just so we know, and then we can do a minute each. Please don't tell me that after their response, because I don't want it to be a to and fro. So please do that after the question's been asked. I'm going to start off with 2 questions. Our walking mic has gone walking, so unfortunately, if you could either shout or you can use my microphone here, I'll get Orla to run up to you if you require it. So just bear with me if we have to do that. So 2 questions that have been submitted in advance. We're going to go from the categories of fees. So question 1, are we able to get any of our £9,000 fees back? And question 2, what actions are the university planning to take to compensate international students who are paying large sums of money for lost contact hours due to industrial action? So I guess fees, and then more specifically international students who are paying vastly more. I've targeted kind of the university on these 2, but if you would like to. No.
On the question of compensation fees, whether you're a home or international student, that is one of the remedies that's available to the institution to address complaints. And so, if you are dissatisfied with the response you have had from schools, you need to submit the complaint, and through the complaints process, the university will look at what you've told us and be able to make an assessment as to whether the learning outcomes remedy is sufficient or whether further steps are required to address your complaint. A financial remedy is one of those, but it's not the only part of those. Some other points to bear in mind: your tuition fees that you pay are paid to cover a whole host of things, not just tuition. So it covers building running costs, student support services, IT services, libraries and so on. All of those continue and will continue to be available to all students throughout the period of industrial action. And the Office of the Independent Adjudicator, which is where if you remain dissatisfied after you have worked through the university's complaints procedures, you can take your complaint to them. They have already looked at some of these issues following the last round of industrial action in 2018, and they have adjudicated on some of these issues already. And their view is that around 50% of tuition fees are for things that are outside of tuition. So you just need to remember those things. They've got case studies on their website. If you did want to go and look at them, they're quite instructive and quite helpful, and can provide you with a sense of the sorts of things they have looked at and already adjudicated on. But overall, if you do feel dissatisfied with the response you have received, it is through the complaints process that Roger has outlined that you can tell us why you are dissatisfied and tell us what kind of remedy you would like to see.
I'm going to move to 2 to the audience. So if you need the mic, put your hand up if you want to ask a question, and I'll take 2. Or I can dive back in to warm you up with some questions that are pre-put forward. Looks like we're doing that then. So the next 2 I'm going to take are from kind of a category of impact on education. So in order to make sure that students do not miss out on more content due to the strikes, will learning materials and possibly extra sessions at another time be available for any missed lectures or seminars? I can read them again after. So that's question 1. Question 2, is there any way that lectures that are going ahead can be recorded regardless of whether lecturers have opted out? I commute into university, which costs me around £5 each trip, I cannot keep driving into university to find I have wasted petrol. Now, I've got these down as a potential answer from both sides, if you think that's suitable. Otherwise, let me know if not. Do you want me to reread? I'll just read. So, question 1 and 2. In order to make sure that students do not miss out on more content due to the strikes, will learning materials and possibly extra sessions at another time be available for missed lectures or seminars? And then question 2, is there any way that lectures that are going ahead can be recorded regardless of whether lectures are opted out? I am commuting to university which costs me around £5 each trip, and I cannot keep driving into university to find I've wasted petrol for a lecture that is not happening.
Shall I give a response to that?
Yeah, I'm going to limit it to a minute each, if that's okay, just so it's not a...
So as you've heard, the schools are going to try and find ways in which they can vary teaching and assessment activities over the next few weeks as necessary, so that we can take account of these issues. As to whether lectures will be replaced, that is a question that may well vary from lecturer to lecturer. Some lecturers are prepared to do that subsequently, others aren't. So what we will do is make sure that any opportunity we have to replace the missed content in other ways will happen. On the second one, can lectures be recorded? Again, we cannot make people record lectures if they're not delivering them. In terms of somebody who spends money coming into the university and they find that their lectures aren't happening, we will definitely look at that, because that's clearly unfair. If you've made that trip and you paid £5 for your petrol, we'll have a look at that and consider whether it's possible to compensate for that.
And anyone, if you feel you're welcome to do with bring mic, you can come on.
I'd like to stress again that one of the things that I think is very striking about the people that work at this university and the teaching is that there's a very strong commitment to working with our students, giving them an education. And many people here feel a strong sense of vocation. So this is not something, withdrawing labour in this way, it's not something that anybody does easily. Part of the question I was asking about replacement of missed contact hours, and I thought it might be useful to underline the fact that if somebody's declaring that they're on strike on a particular day, they will have their pay deducted. So if they replace those lectures at another time, or those contact sessions at another time, in effect, they're doing that on a voluntary basis. And a kind of deeper point, I think, is this comes out of a class I was giving last week, where we looked at a conversation between Judith Butler and Samara Taylor about what sort of a world we live in, how we support each other. And a question Judith Butler asks is, do we or do we not live in a world where we assist each other? And I think right underneath this is that sense of where are we going? Towards a world where there's no altruism, or towards one where everything is about radical self-sufficiency. And in a sense, the pensions dispute is also about that, because pensions are a way of being altruistic, of supporting people in older age. You could end up with a situation where the pension system breaks down, and you see, like you do in America, where you go to a Denny's or something, and there's somebody with a Zimmer frame waiting tables. I think it's fine if people want to work, as long as they're able to and want to, but do we really want to end up in a situation where that becomes a generalised reality?
Going to offer back to the floor. Anyone has a question? See the student there? Do you want the mic?
No, it's all right. So Sheffield haven't reinvested the money to pay lecturers into bursaries for disadvantaged students. So I was wondering what part of uni is planning to do with the money that's not being paid to lecturers when they're on strike.
I'll take a set of two. That's all. Sorry. And then the second, I did see a hand over there. Or maybe I just think yes.
A lot of you said about learning outcomes and the council doing something that left, etc. What about large bodies such as dissertations where supervision is actually makes them what the process is all that?
I'm going to take them as both university. Oh, it was on dissertations and mitigation of dissertations. Yeah.
So So the money, first of all, we do already have a hardship funds for bursaries. You know, we spend an awful lot of money, millions of pounds on bursaries for students as it is, really very, very considerable amounts. The money we save from the industrial action will first of all go to pay any compensation that's required in ways that we've indicated, and anything left over is then given back to the schools that they originally came from, and they are then responsible for dispersing them. I'm sorry, I just couldn't, I'm a bit deaf, I couldn't quite hear what you said.
Do you want me to bring the mic up?
Yeah. A lot has been said about the learning outcomes and lecture things at council and how they can be addressed in exams. What about larger projects such as dissertations and supervision meetings and mates and council? What's the focus on that and how would that be addressed?
Well, again, this will have to be a question that we work out through the schools. I mean, I would be hopeful that if we reach a point where, and I subscribe absolutely to what Ryan said, by the way, that our staff actually are committed to our students and want them to do well, and want to support them as best as possible. One would hope that once the dispute has finally been resolved, and let's hope it doesn't take too long, but if it does, that then at that point it would be possible to make restitution for things like dissertations, which are obviously slightly easier to do than reorganising the exams.
We have to take another two from the floor. I can dive back in. I'll bring the mic.
Is there a possibility that students will be unable to graduate the second year due to these concepts of graduation? And if so, what's the university doing to mitigate that and to ensure that doesn't happen to any students?
How are you going to mitigate the stress that students are going to experience?
Yes, I mean, at this stage, we're expecting that all our students will be able to graduate as planned. You know, what you do in these sorts of situations is hope for the best and kind of plan for the worst. And at the moment, we're in a situation where we do have 14 days of industrial action. There is no obvious reason why that should impact on graduation. I gather, and this will really be for our colleagues here to perhaps talk about, that there is a proposal for a reballot which would extend, and then that would definitely cause us problems that we will need to address. So, and we will do that. We're going to do. We will certainly do everything we can to make sure that our students can graduate, and we've already talked about the commitment that everybody has to that. There are various measures we can engage to, for instance, varying assessment and making sure that examination boards can take the impact of industrial action into account. On the student experience and stress of all of this, we have fortunately got the support of the Welsh Government and the Higher Education Funding Council of Wales, who've made an extra £2 million available this year. It's not specifically because of the industrial action, but we receive several £100,000 from that, so that's really going to help us to bolster these services. But if we need any more detail on that, Simon could add that.
I'm going to take two more from the list because we've had a lot submitted in advance. So there's a question, this one I'm going to assume is specifically for UCU. Why are the strikes all split up over 4 weeks? Is that supposed to be less disruptive? And then secondly, for the university, what is the university doing in order to come up with a long-term solution to prevent further industrial action in the future? Do you want me to reread? Would you like me to reread? First question, right? Yes. Yeah. Why the strikes were split up over 4 weeks?
So in the first industrial action that we had in 2018, this was a strategy that was followed. It was thought by some people to be particularly successful because the industrial action was built over time. And one of the things that has happened in both periods of industrial action is UCU has recruited additional members. And so we've increased our number of members. And so what happened, particularly in 2018, is that more members came out on strike as the strike went on in general. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen this time around, but we definitely recruited new members. And we particularly recruited new and young members and members that were involved in postgraduate teaching. And my perception of that is that the dialogue around the strike let people recognise some of the internalised overworking that they had done, and they recognised some of the exploitation that they were being subjected to. That prompted some of the discussions prompted them to come out. So I think that's perhaps the reason why we follow that same model again in the second strike action. Whether it'll make any difference or not, I'll tell you in 4 weeks' time.
Yes, in terms of a long-term solution, the only long-term solution that we can have is a negotiated one. I think that's very clear. So we do need to continue to work collectively to get progress on this. And I think we can be, I think, positive about the fact that for the first time ever in the history of the USS, we have had now since January talks between UCU, UUK and USS, the pension scheme itself, in the same room. And this has always been a bit of a problem. So the way we resolved, at least temporarily, the 2018 dispute was to say, okay, let's have a joint expert panel of people who really know what they're talking about in this very complex area of pensions, get them to come together between UCU and UUK, and then present results for a way forward. And that has actually been quite successful. That's reduced the costs of the scheme by roughly 5 percentage points, but not as much as we would have wanted had USS been able to accept the proposals in full. So we're in a strange situation where UUK and the universities and the union both agree we've got a way forward. We've had 2 rounds of our expert panel, but USS have been unable to accept it because they are regulated by the pensions regulator and they have all kinds of rules they've got to follow. So what we're trying to do now is, rather than saying, okay, we'll come up with a solution, then see what they think about it, they're all in the same room trying to work out a solution together. Now that's really positive, I think, and I hope that will mean that there will be an agreed way forward on that one. On the other matters, the UCA, which is the Employers Association, and that's dealing with pay and it's dealing with contractual arrangements and equality, equal pay, gender pay, workload and mental health. Now, some of those things are. This is a national dispute. We haven't actually said that. It's a national dispute. Right? So on the pension side, there are more than 340 employers involved in that. We're one of them. On the other side, the one I just mentioned about pay and conditions and so on, there are 74 universities or higher education institutions involved in that, but there are 147 members of the association. So there's about half of them not at all affected by this. And that makes it quite difficult to get an agreement. I think the way that the area we definitely can and should, I think, be able to reach agreement is on the contractual arrangements. I mean, things like a model contract, perhaps, for postgraduate students who are teaching, I think would be that would be really positive if there was a standard way of doing that, so everybody knew what the pay conditions are likely to be, and that could be negotiated on, and we could work on all of that. Some of the other things are more intractable, and I would say that here at Cardiff University we've had a working group, or several working groups actually, working with the unions on issues around contracts and pay and conditions, on gender pay, on equality. So we're putting a lot of effort into that at this university, but as I say, it's a national issue involving altogether hundreds and hundreds of employers, and obviously the union, which has tens of hundreds of thousands of members, or however many the union has. So I think there is a real will to solve this. It's just there are some very, very tricky problems here. But the more we can talk, the better it is.
Going to open up to the floor again. Anyone got any questions? Yeah. We're going to do a run-up.
In terms of submitting our evidence, if we were to submit a complaint, can we use evidence of the lectures that we may have missed last semester? So obviously, in addition to this semester, it does amount to quite a lot, whereas sort of in isolation, of course, we would have thought we could pay forward just for the last semester.
Well, every opportunity I have to urge and persuade our negotiators to find a solution on this, I take, but I don't think there's anything I can say that will make them more likely to want to solve this, because nobody wants to be in this position. It's extremely damaging, you know. I mean, it's damaging for students, it's damaging for staff, it's damaging for universities, and nobody wants to be in this position. So I think there is a real will to find a way forward. The difficulty is that there are some issues that so far we've just not been able to get an agreement on, despite extensive talks. Now, what one would hope that as time proceeds, as last time, a solution comes forward that we're not really aware of. So, you know, we just really have to hope for that. I think on the second one, probably.
In terms of the complaints that we will receive, it will be complaints related to industrial action during the course of this academic year. The industrial action in 2018 was now approximately 2 years ago, and the matters in relation to that industrial action has been closed, and we wouldn't be considering complaints in relation to that in this academic year. It includes the 8 days in the autumn semester and the 14 days in this semester, but not the 2018 action.
Yeah, I just want to follow up with the earlier question for Vice Chancellor, because I was not really satisfied with the answer. This is now the third period of strikes that students are facing within 2 years. So people that are in their third year are facing three periods of strike action and missing lectures because of that. There's of course mitigating action, that's all very good, very important, but I don't hear anything about things that could be done to prevent this, because this is absolutely disgraceful. People are paying a lot of money to go to college here, and they want the same degree that they would otherwise get, but they're not getting it. Even with the mitigating actions, you can see that everybody knows that even combat lecturers are not getting the same degree that everyone otherwise would. So what is the Vice Chancellor personally doing to show some leadership in resolving these disputes? Because on the issue for the 4 issues that are being struck from, Cardiff has quite a dismal record compared to other universities nationally. So why is Cardiff not taking a more leadership role within this?
Well, I don't actually agree with you. We have a more dismal record than other universities nationally on those 4 areas. I mean, on the first of the pensions, that's a national issue. We're in exactly the same position as everybody else, and you know, we are all trying to solve that problem. It's a very difficult problem. On the second point, which is pay, we're in exactly the same position as everybody else. We have collective bargaining. I think we want to keep collective bargaining. We don't negotiate separately on that matter. We're part of UCA, which has 147 employers, and we're all bound by the same collective bargaining process. And on the other 3 matters, we have put an awful lot of work into that. We've put a huge amount of effort into resolving, as far as we can, the workload problem. This afternoon at the Senate, we're going to have a debate about what we can do to reduce the burden of assessment, both on staff and on students, to cut workload and improve the student experience. We've been absolutely supportive of the 2 joint expert panels, and in fact we formed in early 2018 our own expert panel within Cardiff University to feed into that debate, and we continue to feed into the debate on pensions and on these other areas as well. And anything we can do locally to address that, we do. So I don't accept the argument that we're not showing leadership in them and that we're not doing everything we can to try and avert this. I really believe that on both sides there has been huge efforts and an awful lot of time devoted to trying to find a solution to avert these strikes. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked out. I wish it had.
Another two questions from the floor?
So on a local level, we haven't seen a commitment to giving staff members their strike reduction spread out over a few months. I think this would go a long way to showing a gesture of goodwill if truly things are being done on a local level.
Firstly, I want to thank the Vice Chancellor and the management for being here today. My question relates to what provisions are in place for student strike action and what PSU do to get all parties members to be able to flesh out and
Yeah, so our policy is that we deduct pay at a rate of 365th per day that people go on strike, and it's deducted the month after they go on strike. Now, if the strikes were staggered over several months, we would deduct pay over several months, but they're not. They're over 4 weeks in this case, and therefore over 2 months. What we did before, in the November-December strikes, was to slightly vary that, because to deduct directly after the strikes would have meant making a deduction just before Christmas, which is just an expensive time for everybody. So we delayed that until January. On this occasion, it will be the months after the strike action has taken place, because that's when the impact was, and that's the next occasion we'll be able to deduct pay. In the last dispute, as part of the dispute resolution, we agreed to stage the deductions over, I think it was 3 months on that occasion. That's a slightly different matter. If there's a route out of the dispute and we say, okay, as part of that, as part of the solution, we will agree to stagger pay over several months, then that would be up for consideration.
So second one, I'm going to try and answer as best I can, which my interpretation was, what is the student union doing in supporting strike action or facilitating the debate? Supporting students during strike action. Yeah. So in terms of what are we doing with students to support them, we've mandated at our most recent AGM to be in support of strike action. So we've been working closely with Ryan and UC members in terms of getting our comms sorted so that we can both do a joined up approach from UCU side to kind of reach students and to make sure students know the reasons behind the strike. Yesterday there was a democracy from day one, which is, you might have seen it in kind of the welcome centre. Students get the opportunity to put balls in tubes to answer a question. So that was run by our PGR students, members from UCU. So it was basically how do we get feedback from students to better our comms around the strikes and the strike impacts and what students are wondering about the strikes. So we have now got some feedback from that and what the students have said in terms of their stances on supporting and wanting to find out more. So kind of analysing research at the top at the moment. Going forward, we've got strike info stalls with students on kind of trying to target students face to face, because that's kind of the best way to sometimes get that message across. Our advice department is working very closely. Obviously, you've heard about the complaints procedure. Kind of the only way that you're going to get refunds is to follow this complaints procedure. If you choose to withhold fees, you run the risk of potentially the university pursuing you for withholding fees. We don't know if that's the case. I'm not going to ask you now. In terms of using the complaints procedure, our advice team upstairs is dedicated on supported students to go through that. Otherwise, in terms of getting students, like getting staff and UCU around the table, it's very hard. We're kind of a very small piece in this puzzle. You've heard of kind of the national level discussions going on. All we can do is try and keep both sides as amicable as possible. Like, I'm happy to facilitate talks behind closed doors. You probably won't take me up on that, but I mean, anything that you can't do privately, please get in touch and let us know where we can come in. But it's more, we're here to represent students, so feeding in that student voice to both sides, I think, is really important to kind of keep that agenda on the table. But otherwise, I think that's kind of, yeah. Two more, sorry. Do you mind?
correspondence from a group of students writing directly to the parties negotiating how this happened. Is that something that like to move the process forward?
So if you didn't catch that, it was a collective student union action from writing an open letter to senior members of UUK and UCA, which are kind of the negotiating bodies that we're part of at the university. A lot of student unions around the country have banded together in drafting an open letter to these targeted individuals. The student unions that are kind of getting around the tables to draft that are student unions that are either pro or being mandated to be pro strike action with UCU. So it's coming from an angle of get back around the table and we're applying pressure on behalf of students. I believe it's been drafted, I don't know if it's been sent yet. It's something that Jackie's been working on as president, as well as I think 70 other presidents from student unions across the country. But it's in the pipeline if it's not run out yet. Any more questions then? We've got time for two? Not really. Do you want a very keen hand at the back? I'm going to have to close, I'm really sorry. I know you've got a time calendar. Sorry. Unless if you are happy to delegate, perhaps. Yeah. Sorry, the last two.
This is a question to the start handling the complaints process. Why shouldn't, since the 2017-2018 academic students have experienced a record, as mentioned, amounting to 3 months worth of education has not been effectively delivered? Why shouldn't those be considered within the complaints process, given that that is such a significant portion of the time for which students are essentially paying but have not necessarily?
Did you catch that, Audrey?
So today there's been a lot of talk on side outcomes of discussions and negotiations. So this is a question between both parties involved. What were your desired outcomes and of negotiations, and why didn't things work out? It'd be interesting to hear both of your views on that.
Do you want to start? And then for that second question, just in the interest of time, can we do a minute each? Is that okay? Just to be a summary, perhaps, if possible.
In relation to the industrial action which took place in 2017-18, students had the opportunity to complain at the end of that period, and many did, and those issues have been resolved and closed. So the purpose of the new complaints procedure is to learn from how we dealt with those complaints, to apply it in such a way to simplify the process for students and to deal with the issues that are arising from this period of industrial action during the course of 1920.
So on the two things, our desired outcome, and we still stick with this, was that the outcome of the joint expert panel on pensions should be the route forward for us. And that was something that was negotiated between the union and the universities. And we supported both the first report and we support the second report. And we want that really to be the way forward on that. And on pay, it would have been wonderful if via the joint negotiating committee we could have reached an agreement on last year's pay round. I think that was not possible. What I would like to see on the contractual arrangements is that we do get a sensible kind of framework for universities to manage contractual arrangements in a way that's agreeable to both sides, so that everybody understands, here's a standard framework that you operate within, and we agree that that is fair and that's the right way to do things. And on the gender pay gap and other equality gaps, we just need to close those gaps, and we need to work together on that.
It's really the fact that the universities are also really committed to following the results of the joint expert panel. But UCL put out some info recently that a couple of days ago that 84% of university employers said basically rejected increasing member contributions to the USS pension scheme. So it's, just wondering, or rather from our perspective, from the UCU perspective, it seems that things are being said one way and then potentially we think that negotiations are moving forward and then they maybe go back a little bit when those consultations reject recommendations. In terms of what the union wants, things like a 35-hour week as a basis for contracts, to end 0-hour contracts, a living wage for all staff, and a pay rise of retail price index plus 3% are some of the things that the union is asking for in these, and is willing to compromise to find something that works for everyone.
Thank you all for coming. I know we've gone over a little bit, but please give a round of applause to our